Gopijana Vallabha Girivarana Yashodanandana Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki Hari Hari All glory to Samaguru Hari Krishna All glory to Samaguru Hari Krishna All glory to Samaguru Hari All glory to Sri Guru Sri Guru and Sri Prabhupada Apologize for being a little late here. We had reading from Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, volume 6. Titled Chant Hare Krishna and Fight. The issue here is this. Is that okay? Hare Krishna. It's okay. I remember when we were talking about Prabhupada's arriving in Bombay. This is becoming very... But the title is still Chant Hare Krishna and Fight. And when we last left, I think all the devotees had come to Mayapur in 1974. Okay, so this is the opening night of the Pandal. We'd already read about the devotees chartering the airplane, chartering the air flight. So on February 22nd, 350 devotees arrived on a Boeing 747 Air India jet at Doom Doom Airport in Calcutta. Now it's called Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Airport. But at that time it was Dum Dum. The special flight, all devotees had flown from Los Angeles to New York to London, picking up more devotees at each stop. As it was the first landing of a 747 in Calcutta, the mayor, local militia, leading Air India dignitaries and media people were on hand to greet the historic flight. One of the devotees told a reporter that the Boeing 747s coming from the west to Calcutta was the mercy of Lord Chaitanya and Srila Prabhupada. 10 busloads of devotees then rode to Mayapur. Soon the Mayapur Chandradoya Mandir was teeming with transcendental activity. The Gaura Purnima festival was in full swing. The Vaikuntha Players of New York staged an evening theater performance of the Ramayana, and Srila Prabhupada attended. The audience watched and appreciated Srila Prabhupada almost as much as they did the play. On the opening night of the Pandal, a government minister attended to officially inaugurate the festivities. He cut a ribbon to open the new building, and he and Srila Prabhupada walked together down the long first-floor corridor and viewed a photo display of ISKCON centers around the world. Halfway down the corridor, Srila Prabhupada stopped, shook his head, and said, "It is all inconceivable." The minister was also amazed at the scale on which Srila Prabhupada was propagating Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Then Srila Prabhupada and his guest went onto the stage. The minister gave an introductory speech glorifying a well-known impersonalist Swami, referring to him as a divine incarnation. I remember we read this part. But we want to read the part about the book distribution. Prabhupada was, after this, well, you want to call it conflict, but with the Mayavadi on stage, Prabhupada spoke afterwards, and when he went back to his room, he was smacking his fist like this, says, "I have smashed him." So it's the part we read. In the English language alone, Srila Prabhupada had published 43,450,500 pieces of literature. And the total production of Prabhupada's books in 23 languages, including Russian, was 55,314,000, more than 90% of which had already been distributed. Rameshwar also presented Srila Prabhupada with a new book off the press, 9th Canto, Part 1 of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Srila Prabhupada continued to be very active, encouraging devotees, writing, preaching. Soon after the busloads of devotees arrived, however, Srila Prabhupada became very ill again. His busy schedule became strained, but he continued. The GBC men began their annual 3 days of meetings, and each evening they would meet with Srila Prabhupada. And this is in 1975. He heard their proposals and after making some corrections, approved them. The final item in the GBC's resolution was that all ISKCON temples should hold 24-hour kirtan in view of Prabhupada's illness. The devotees had also done this in 1974. Yes, Prabhupada said when he heard the resolution, chanting is the only cure for all diseases. On Gaura Purnima, Srila Prabhupada accepted more than 200 disciples for first initiation. He awarded second initiation to 100 disciples. Huge crowds poured through the front gate all day, and from 4 p.m. until late at night, the roads would be packed, and the kirtans would attract large receptive audiences. In the afternoon, Srila Prabhupada received Tarun Kanti Ghosh, the Home Minister for Bengal, also in charge of the state police force. Prabhupada spoke with Mr. Ghosh in his room and found him very favorable toward ISKCON and the Hare Krishna philosophy. Tarun Kanti Ghosh was a friend. His father was a friend of Srila Prabhupada. He wrote a paper. Prabhupada knew his father when he had the pharmacy in Prayag in Allahabad. And he was more than quite favorable, actually. He would come to see Prabhupada often. We would go to Delhi when we were in Delhi, and we would see him. Very nice, not a very elderly person, actually. His father was quite elderly. He was a young man, relatively speaking. You'll see some pictures sometimes in Prabhupada's room. There's a Bengali gentleman with quite a bit of hair, and he's leaning on Prabhupada like this, and that's Tarun Kanti Ghosh, if you ever see in Prabhupada's. Huh? Prabhupada's room in Mayapur. And yeah, his father owned a very prominent newspaper at the very time. Prabhupada's generation were all very nice individuals. We would meet them occasionally and from time to time, and their children were generally mostly favorable also. And he was, like it says here, he was a home minister from that area. And because of his position, we would sometimes see him in Delhi. Interesting thing was they didn't, although they liked Prabhupada and everything, their relationship to their culture, at least the religious part of it, was very estranged. They didn't really worship Krishna per se. They all accepted that Krishna is God. One time I was in his bungalow all the government ministers have their bungalows on Janpat, this famous road in Delhi. And we were there. I was there for some preaching, and so we stopped in to say Haribol to him. He let us in. He introduced us to his guests, and we were giving a little discussion. And he was always very favorably to the devotees because we could preach, so to speak. You know, he didn't know any shastra or anything, so they would kind of show us off, like, you know, look, these are from my home district in West Bengal. And then after the program is over, he wanted to show me his deities. So I thought, what will he show, you know? So, you know, usually there's some room with a curtain. So I was sitting there just waiting, and he came with a box, a wooden box. When he opened it, there was a huge collection of Shīlas inside, but obviously they were just kept in this box. They weren't worshipped or anything. And I thought, this is an unfortunate situation. Of course, I touched my head, because who knows, you know, he's inherited these in his family line probably for hundreds of years, but they don't know what to do with them. Just a collection of Shīlas. And I was thinking to say, you know, maybe you should just let us take these and worship them. And you can tell me the story behind them, because literally, you know, their families from Bengal, they're hundreds and hundreds of years old. They're worshiping the Shīlas. But he was the last in the line, and he didn't know what to do, and he just had everything in a box like that. So interesting at that time. Shalagram Shila Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, 3rd canto, 7th chapter, text 13. Chapter titled, Further Inquiries by Vidura. Is that correct? Yidendriyayo paramota, Yidendriyayo paramota, Drastratmani pareharo, Viliyante tada klesha, Sangspuptas yeva kritsna saha, Yadendriyo paramo, Yadendriyo paramota, Yadendriyo paramota, Drastratmani pareharo, Viliyante tada klesha, Samsuptas yeva kritsna saha. Please chant. Yadendriyo paramota, Drastratmani pareharo, Viliyante tada klesha, Samstuptas yeva kritsna taha. Yadendriyo paramota, Drastratmani pareharo. Vilayante tada klesha. Samtuptasyeva Krishna saha. Yadendriyo paramota. Drastratmani hare paro. Vilayante tada klesha. Samstuptasyeva Krishna saha. Yadendriyo paramota. Drastratmani pareharo. Vilayante tada klesha. Samstuptasyeva Krishna saha. Would you like to chant, Jimmy? Not this time? No problem. You can chant. Yes, chant. Yadendriyo paramota. Drastratmani pareharo. Vilayante tada klesha. Samstuptasyeva Krishna saha. Yada, when indriya, senses, upadamaha, satiated, ata, thus, drastratmani, unto the seer, the supersoul, pare, in the transcendence, haro, unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, vilayante, become merged in, tada, at that time, klesha, miseries, samstuptasya, one who has enjoyed sound sleep, eva, like, Krishna saha, completely. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. When the senses are satisfied in the seer supersoul, the personality of Godhead, and merge in Him, all miseries are completely vanquished as after a sound sleep. Please repeat. When the senses are satisfied in the seer supersoul, the personality of Godhead, and merge in Him, all miseries are completely vanquished as after a sound sleep. Purport. The quivering of the living entity as described above is due to the senses. Since the entire material existence is meant for sense gratification, the senses are a medium of material activities, and they cause the quivering of the steady soul. Therefore, these senses are to be detached from all such material activities. According to the impersonalists, the senses are stopped from work by merging the soul in the supersoul, Brahman. The devotees, however, do not stop the material senses from acting, but they engage their transcendental senses in the service of the transcendence, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In either case, the activities of the senses in the material field are to be stopped by cultivation of knowledge, and if possible, they can be engaged in the service of the Lord. The senses are transcendental in nature, but their activities become polluted when contaminated by matter. We have to treat the senses to cure them of the material disease, not stop them from acting, as suggested by the impersonalist. In the Bhagavad Gita 2:59, it is said that one ceases all material activities only when satisfied by contact with a better engagement. Consciousness is active by nature and cannot be stopped from working. Artificially stopping a mischievous child is not the real remedy. The child must be given better engagement so that he will automatically stop causing mischief. In the same way, the mischievous activities of the senses can be stopped only by better engagement in relation with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When the eyes are engaged in seeing the beautiful form of the Lord, the tongue engaged in tasting prasad, or remnants of foodstuff offered to the Lord, the ears are engaged in hearing His glories, the hands engaged in cleaning the temple of the Lord, the legs engaged in visiting His temples, or when all the senses are engaged in transcendental variegatedness, then only can the transcendental senses become satiated and eternally free from material engagement. The Lord, as the Supersoul residing in everyone's heart, and as the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the transcendental world, far beyond the material creation, is the seer of all our activities. Our activities must be so transcendentally saturated that the Lord will be kind enough to look upon us favorably and engage us in His transcendental service. Then only can the senses be satisfied completely and be no longer troubled by material attraction. Om Jnana Tamrandasya Granjana Salakaya Chakshor Malatamina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Lankai Tegaram Yat Kripatamaham Vande Shri Gurum Dinataranam. So this very nice verse for the temple commanders in ISKCON to quote to all those new bhaktas who are coming and wondering how to engage their senses in the service of the Lord. Prabhupada very clearly says here, cleaning the temple. We wonder why that's such a prominent verse, that it's quoted in the Gurvastakam every morning. Shringara Tan Mandira Marjanado. That beautifying the temple, of course, Prabhupada gives that verse, quotes quite often, Samo Dhamotapasocham, these qualities of a Brahmana. But many times he says that the first quality of a Brahmana, the first two qualities, what are those first two qualities? Truthfulness and cleanliness. And we hear this refrain often in religious circles, that cleanliness is next to godliness. So one is encouraged to be clean internally and externally. You know, this living in the ashram is different in many ways, but primarily one first learns how to become clean. I remember joining the temple in the early days and being completely caught off guard as to what the real standard of cleanliness is. Coming from the counterculture where bathing was an infrequent act, we were all very surprised that you take bath not just once a day, but sometimes twice and thrice in a day. So yeah, it was quite an interesting revelation. But we were all up for the challenge, you can say. We were eager to learn the way of the ancient ones. The whole idea surrounding the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita, the fact that it's being presented and that it's, well, by many estimations, at least 5,000 years old. We all wanted to know many things about the ancient philosophy, and so cleanliness was one of them. That and the first engagement many of us found in Krishna consciousness was washing Krishna's pots. And there was a method to that. You know, many devotees, sometimes people come in and you wonder how to engage them in Krishna service. And in the old days, the pot room was not part of the kitchen. It was a separate room, at least on Henry Street. And so anybody could go in and wash the pots because you didn't have to go into the temple kitchen. So you could be in almost any condition. And many times people were in almost any condition. And then Prabhupada was commented that washing the pots is like taking a bath. So one is being cleansed simultaneously, internally and externally. And we learned all these aphorisms early on, before we even learned Sanskrit shlokas, that washing the pot is cleansing your heart. Now, later on, we would all learn to relate these aphorisms given to us by the senior devotees to things like Chaita Darpana Marjanam Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam. But in those days, very few of us even knew what the Shikshastikam was. Very early days in Krishna consciousness. But yet the essence of the philosophy was there. This is the point we were making. Is that Prabhupada was giving us what we needed at the time in order to purify us, to purify our dull, transcendental senses. And this is an interesting point that he's making here. That the senses are transcendental, but just covered. But it's more than covered. The technical term is contaminated. You know, it's like now we're in the middle of a so-called pandemic. And everyone is very conscious that it's very easy to become infected, and acquire the symptoms, of some fever and cough or whatever like that. But the general state of the material body, more or less, is that it's in a healthy condition. So when we experience these things, we understand that there's something else is going on. I'm not well. Sometimes you lose the sense of taste or the sense of smell. So in that same way, we're working always to return to a healthy condition of life, where our sense of taste and smell is restored to its former state, whatever that state is. But the ability to perceive the different objects of senses. So in this way, we come to appreciate what is the necessity for purification. That this cleansing internally and externally doesn't have some miraculous, instantaneous transformation. It's not that immediately the senses become purified and we understand the true nature of transcendence in the form of the deity or any other aspect on that elevated level. But gradually one comes to perceive that his intelligence is purified and that he can understand concepts which were previously foreign to him, like Dehinosmin yata dehe kumaram yovanam jara, that the living entity is changing from one body to another. Now, who would think that just by washing Krishna's pots, one could be elevated to a higher understanding of transcendence? This is indeed a mystic transformation, not easily understood by someone because they cannot appreciate the transcendental nature of devotional service. So this was, in one sense, the test. What is the difference between Krishna conscious philosophy and other philosophies? You can sit in college for years on end studying philosophy 101, 201, 301, 401, whatever, but never once experience a change in consciousness. But simply by washing a pot or wiping a floor in the Lord's temple can have an immediate effect. Sarvopari vinirmuktam tat parattvena nirmalam rishikesha rishikena sevanam bhaktir uttam. That one should engage all the senses, sarvopari, giving up all unnecessary material engagements, activities, unwanted things. It's a bit of renunciation, and this is one of the keys, obviously. We don't do it necessarily by some voluntary conscious effort, but just by coming in contact with the devotees and trying to imitate them. We're giving up so many things. We don't bring all of our material possessions into the temple when we move in. We leave everything behind. So that act of renunciation is part of the cumulative consideration that Krishna sees from within, because he ultimately is the witness. He understands that this person is trying to become close to me. This is just what Prabhupada was describing. We're not impersonalists. We understand that Krishna is situated in the heart, and God is in the heart of every living entity. And that from him comes knowledge, remembrance, and forgetfulness. So everything taken together, this process is so sublime. This is another one of those words you don't run across very often, because there's not much in the material world which is sublime. What is there? Huh? But there in the back of the mantra card that we used to distribute, chant these names of God and your life will be sublime. And when we came to the temple, we could understand that there is a tangible transformation. Raja Vidya Raja Goyam Pavitram Idamuttamam Pratyaksha Bhagamam Dharmyam Susukam Kartamavyam. This knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of religion. It is everlasting and joyfully performed. So there is no other philosophy that has this innate combination of unique characteristics that make it the perfection of religion. And religion is not some appellation we ascribe to some ethnic consideration. It's not that this is something coming from some geographical location or from some other place. No, religion means the relationship between the living entity and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And people make mistakes that they say that this is some secular or, like you said, geographic thing. People will sometimes say, but you're Hindus. And, well, if that's your observation, but actually where we worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, God is not Hindu, God is not Christian, God is not Muslim, God is God. He is above all designations. But according to the individual, he sees or appreciates him according to his limited consciousness. So this is a very important understanding that we all learned very early on in spiritual life, that the more we engaged in transcendental activities, the more purified our senses would become. And of course, the maximum purification, so when you're washing the floor, washing the pots, you're engaging many of your senses. And ultimately you're controlling the mind. You're engaging the mind because the mind is what is the seat of the senses. And you have to put it mildly, encourage the senses to do something that you may not be externally favorable to. Maybe you don't want to wash the floor. Maybe you feel that that's a service that's it's beneath my station in life. I'm meant for bigger, better, more glorious activities. Anybody can wash a floor. But the fact is, not everybody can wash Krishna's floor. It's only by special invitation. And then one continues on in this path to purification, controlling the mind, and he learns that what is the most favorable service which I can perform for the spiritual master? What is the order most dear to him? So as one becomes advanced in spiritual life, he seeks out, and many times Srila Prabhupada would be questioned, Prabhupada, what can I do to please you? What can I do to please you? And oftentimes his response was, just distribute my books. Because this transcendental connection through the parampara, just like last night I was reading again the introduction to Krishna book. And in the introduction to Krishna book, Prabhupada goes through a whole line of our parampara, thanking individually all of our acharyas. First identifying that we're in the Gaudiya Sampradaya, and then the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya, and then thanking Srila Madhvacharya, and then his disciples, and then Ishwara Puri, the spiritual master of Lord Chaitanya, and then Lord Chaitanya's followers. So in this way, we see that there's this unbroken chain, and that distributing these books is extending this unbroken chain throughout the civilized, so-called civilized world, giving everyone the opportunity to come in contact with this transcendental knowledge that otherwise was locked up in Sanskrit language, for hundreds, if not thousands of years, until great souls like Srila Prabhupada saw in their compassion to extend themselves at great endeavor, great trouble, to come to wherever, in this case to the Western world, in order to deliver this message. So this is basically, we should know that there's the Bhagavatam is referred to in two ways. One is the book Bhagavatam, and then there's the person Bhagavatam. The person Bhagavatam can also be Krishna, obviously. Krishna is the personification of the Bhagavatam. The book Bhagavatam is not different from Krishna. But then the person who carries the knowledge of the Bhagavatam is also considered the Bhagavatam, like Sukadeva Goswami. Or in our case, in recent history, like Srila Prabhupada. And the fact that Srila Prabhupada carried with him on his journey of 39 days from India, in his 3 trunks, the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, is further confirmation how this knowledge, important, world-changing, revolutionary knowledge was brought again to the forefront in order to change the misled lives of the people in general. So somehow or other, we're here to take up the mission. This is our duty as members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, founded by Srila Prabhupada here in New York City in 1966, that it is a burden of love. One should always feel great gratitude that we have such an opportunity. If one loses this sense of gratitude, then very quickly he may question, why am I here in this cold, dark city? You step out at night, you don't even see the stars in the sky. It's almost like living in a subterranean hellish planet. And where do we perform most of our activities? In the subterranean subways of the subterranean hellish city. But that's where we meet the denizens and enlighten them. So this Bhagavatam is compared to the sun. So wherever the devotees go, bring the holy name and these books, is just like introducing sun into a dark place. So we're very fortunate to have the opportunity to serve their Lordship Sri Sri Radha Govinda and their exquisite beauty. We want to introduce them to everyone. Everyone should have the opportunity. And especially this is the 50th anniversary of their coming to New York City. 50 years in New York City. Very special. And anyone who's ever met Sri Sri Radha Govinda can carry this impression. And I've reminded many times that on my first visit to Mayapur, we were in Srila Prabhupada's bedroom, and there on the wall in Srila Prabhupada's bedroom, only one photo, and that photo is of Sri Sri Radha Govinda. Only one photo. So how dear Sri Sri Radha Govinda are to Srila Prabhupada, we cannot imagine. It's inconceivable. So that is why we feel very confident that everything will go on very nicely as long as we remain fixed in our determination to execute our duty. What did Krishna tell Arjuna? Famous, Nimitta matram bhava savyasachin. Just become an instrument. Don't try to become something separate, acquire some name or fame or reputation. Just become an instrument. An instrument has no separate identity from the person who is wielding the instrument. All right, so depending on that individual, he uses the instrument in different ways. So we're all Krishna's instruments, and he can use us as he likes. But we have to be submissive. We have to be receptive. And then we will find our place in Krishna's service automatically, without any extra endeavor. Just like Krishna has a plan for every living entity in the material world, whether they know it or not. Of course, the materialists, they call it fate or destiny. They have no idea what karma is. They don't. The way the modes of material nature work are completely beyond their experience. But due to one's past activities, he's accumulated some action and reaction. Sometimes it's called good karma, sometimes it's called bad karma. And you can recognize the symptoms. You see that a person is born in a very favorable situation, very favorable bodily features. Obviously, there was some good karma involved there. And at the same time, someone is born in a very hellish situation. Maybe there's some congenital defects, bodily defects. Not a very nice situation. And people wonder why. Why is this person born with a silver spoon in his mouth? Another person born in such a very unfortunate situation. But this is karma. And the devotees can understand what it is. So we should be mindful of who we are, what we are, where we're coming from, but at the same time, not let that influence us. Because the first day of our actual existence is the moment that we realized that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Again, in this lifetime. That was the beginning. It's like waking up from a dream. It's like life before Krishna and life after Krishna. When we think of life before Krishna, that was our life in ignorance. We had no idea. But after Krishna, when we have a little bit of understanding, you see how our outlook and what activities we should and shouldn't perform become very prominent. We're finally awake. So I was a little late, so I don't want to keep the class unnecessarily long. Matanga Prabhu will become angry that the prasadam is becoming cold. So any questions or comments? Yes, Bhakta Kyle.
I just want to say thank you for giving class. Your experience in the birds is very moving. I'm thankful that I've been accepted here. I believe that in the devotees here. I guess my question would be, in those moments where we see flickering, devotion or steadfastness, how can we grab hold of those two or lead them and not let go?
It's a very good question. Even great yogis struggle with that. The idea is to develop a genuine attachment first to the spiritual master. When we appreciate the sacrifice that these great souls have made in order to bring Krishna consciousness to us, that softens the heart if one is genuine. Our relationship with Krishna in its nascent stage will be reflected very, how can you say, carefully by that cultivation with the spiritual master. Because in the material world, it's very difficult to give of oneself. Everybody's had experience of disappointment. The Nectar of Instruction goes over this very clearly, that where do we repose our love? Nothing in the material world is permanent. Everyone may have experienced that when they're young, someone you loved or something you loved has passed away. And it leaves a bit of a vacant spot in one's heart initially, at least the material, emotional heart, not the transcendental heart. And so depending on how many disappointments one experiences, the heart can become hard. And he will refrain from establishing relationships out of fear of separation or rejection. So, very interesting how when we come in contact with the spiritual master, even though that may appear to be a temporary relationship, it reawakens the dormant eternal relationship that we have with Krishna. So this very important point, when one reposes his love in Krishna or the Guru, he will never be disappointed. The spiritual master is our spiritual master eternally, in one form or another. So. And we're also very happy to have you here, Bhakta Kal. Yes, but Tulsi Prabhu.
When we are speaking about purification of senses, what is the better approach? First to wait our senses to be purified, and then to engage in service and help others, or just try to help others, although we are still maybe not completely.
Well, certainly purification of speech is speaking about Krishna. If one speaks what he has heard without any adulteration, then his speaking is perfect. Prabhupada always encouraged us to speak according to our realization. So if one has not realized anything beyond the initial understanding that I am not this body, then obviously he should not speak about the transcendental pastimes of the Lord in Vrindavan. But but according to his realization, he should speak. From boyhood to youth to old age, when we read that in the Bhagavad Gita, everyone can appreciate that I had a 7-year-old body, but that body is no longer here. And so that level of preaching is already more advanced than 99% of the philosophers in the material world. And so even the most neophyte devotee living in the temple who can express this point confidentially will have an impact on a guest as long as he is speaking from a platform of realization, where he knows that I am not this body. It's a very interesting, I can remember so many times sitting in the temple on Sunday, speaking to guests on a very basic platform, just because I could somehow or other appreciate that, I was not this body, and that I was spirit soul, and that I am unborn, eternal, primeval, ever existing, not slain when the body is slain. We would learn these verses in the very early stages, second chapter of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Gita, because, well, they were easy to relate to for our neophyte platform. So the idea is, if one could be just like Prabhupada used to use the analogy of when you're cooking a pot of rice, and you want to tell if the pot is done, if you simply take one kernel from the center of the pot, you can tell if the whole pot is cooked or not. So in the same way, we have this appreciation that when we were reading the Bhagavad Gita, and we understood the truth, the very profound truth being presented, that no other scripture, there is no other scripture that presents this truth. That we are not these bodies, that we are spirit, soul, pure spirit. Everything else they say, no, you have to die and then you go to heaven in some form or another. No clear explanation. Very vague. Not very satisfying intellectually, philosophically or otherwise. But right in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall we ever cease to be. Such a profound thing. When I read this, I was like amazed. And so then one can show, any guest, have you read this? Anywhere else in your 23 years of existence, in your college, undergraduate, graduate, or doctoral, have you ever come across this before? No, of course, nobody has. If they're honest, they'll say, I need to read this book. So being convinced early on will lead one to a much higher level of realization. In a sense, we see that this is the actual result of purification. And as the senses are purified, tada rajas tamao bhavo kamalobhadayasya, one experiences rising to a certain level. He may not understand exactly what it is, but as his senses are being purified, he's coming to the level of the mode of goodness, from where all knowledge takes place. You don't have knowledge in the mode of passion or ignorance. There's no knowledge. This is the animal platform. When we come in contact with this, we're already coming to the mode of goodness. Somehow or other, we've already met devotees, we've already chanted the holy name, even indirectly. And as we're reading and we're purifying our consciousness, we're understanding more and more. That is the test. That is how you understand how this process of purification is working. That which I could not understand before, after washing Krishna's pots, now I understand. How? How? Simply by engaging in this transcendental activity, which is why we make an endeavor to engage people in Krishna's service. Because we know that a transcendental transformation will take place. We have personally experienced it. Pratyaksha bhagamam dharmyam. We have practically experienced it. That's why it's the perfection of religion. So again, we're very fortunate to have everything like this handed to us, essentially on a silver platter. All the sages have done all the work for us. We don't have to do anything. We simply have to take part. Just like a big army, they're already victorious. A person, just a new guy, just graduated from boot camp. He didn't do anything in the war. The war ended yesterday, but he takes part in the victory celebration because he's part of the army. So everything has already been done for us. We're already victorious. We simply have to take part. Make our contribution, however small or great it might be. Lord Chaitanya and Krishna have already done everything. We just have to hold our place. And Krishna is doing everything. We're not doing anything. Any other questions? Matanga is really going to be angry at us now. Yes, Bhakti Jimmy. Another very good question. You sustain that mood by sustaining that mood, by engaging in those activities. If one's consciousness is, as you progress in spiritual life, one recognizes that all of these activities in Krishna service are non-different. They're transcendental. Nama Chintamani Krishna Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. At the name of Krishna, his pastime, his forms, everything is the same. But according to our situation, we see them differently. We think that this service is better than this service, or this service is easier, or I can get closer to Krishna this way. It's actually all the same. It's only our consciousness. But some activities are harder, and because we're trying harder to execute them, maybe I'm fighting my false ego, or maybe it's easier because I like chanting or dancing. So depending on that situation, one may find himself in a favorable situation. But the real essence will be that one can be Krishna conscious and feel protected by Krishna under any circumstances, whether in heaven or hell. So that is the test. But yes, by all means, we want to engage in activities that give us constant remembrance of Krishna. Like when we were washing the pots in the early days, at that time the technology was very rudimentary. We had cassette players. Everyone know what a cassette is? Everyone heard of a cassette? You have to be really old now to know what a cassette is. And before that it was reel-to-reel tape recorders, but somehow or other cassettes came into fashion. So we would listen to Srila Prabhupada's lectures. A lot of the devotees who joined at that time were musicians. And so we had a never-ending supply of amplifiers and heads, huge amplifiers. And we would stick one in the kitchen and connect our little tiny tape recorder to it and blast Srila Prabhupada's lectures so that it would cut through the mind, giving us all this flack, this unnecessary noise about why I shouldn't be washing these pots, why I should be out enjoying with my friend. No, you drown it out with transcendental sound vibration. And now it's easy. You put a pair of headphones in, You listen to Srila Prabhupada's lecture, you clean the floor, you clean the pots, you do anything. Because I'm connected to transcendence. I'm listening to Srila Prabhupada. And when you're listening to Srila Prabhupada and washing, it goes that much deeper, that much quicker, in my experience. Otherwise, I have no qualification, except that I was listening to Srila Prabhupada's lectures while I was washing pots. Otherwise, what qualification do I have? Nothing. But somehow or other, yena tena prakarena, somehow or other become Krishna conscious. That means always thinking of Krishna. And it can be done with, constantly hearing, remembering, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Bandham, these 9 processes of devotional service, any one of them leads one to perfection. One should try to appreciate which all of those processes become good at one or many, but at least one. Even hearing, even just hearing, right? Okay, so we'll end the class. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. Would you like to say something to the class here? Just finished.